Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. This episode of MacStories Unwind and all of MacStories this week is brought to you by SaneBox. I'm John Voorhees, and let's dive into this week's stories. I'm flying solo today, but Federico will be back next week. All right, let's start with the biggest story that I published this week. I'm doing this show, so I'm going to talk about what I wrote about. And that is my review of the HomePod Mini. I have been, the HomePod Mini isn't new, but I've been living with it for a couple of months now. And I've been living with not just one HomePod Mini, but I've actually got 5 in my house. Apple sent me a couple to review and test, but I also picked up some myself, one for a gift for one of my kids and a couple of more that I've put throughout the house. And it was a good test of what the HomePod Mini is all about. And there are 3 things I cover in this review. I talk about the audio quality, which is surprisingly good, especially in a stereo pair, though not comparable to the original HomePod or something like the AirPods Max, but that's to be expected because those are higher end audio products that are a lot more expensive, but it is solid and I like it a lot. The second area that I talked about is thread radios. And thread radios is a new technology. Well, I shouldn't say it's a new technology. It's actually been around since 2014, but it's new to Apple and it's new to HomeKit devices. There's a thread radio in the HomePod Mini. That thread radio allows it to connect with other HomeKit devices that support thread. And what that means is they can form a low-power mesh network of your HomeKit devices that is independent of your Wi-Fi network. That means if your Wi-Fi goes down, your HomeKit devices will still operate just like they're supposed to. It also means that battery-operated devices, things like locks or, say, door or window sensors that use smaller rechargeable or even alkaline batteries, those can last, the Thread working group says, up to 2 years on something like a AA battery. So there's a lot of advantages to Thread. It's not in a lot of devices yet. Nanoleaf has a light strip and some bulbs. I tested out one of the bulbs that Apple also sent. There's also some Eve Home products that are compatible with Thread, but that's about it for now in terms of HomeKit devices. So keep an eye out for those because I think things are going to be happening with Thread in the future. It's an interesting technology and I hope it catches on. And the third thing is Siri. Siri, is not perfect, but I've found that having Siri throughout my house and not just say, on my phone or on my HomePod in my living room has been a big benefit. I do things like add to my grocery list with it. I obviously listen to music. I create reminders. I control my HomeKit devices, all that. So kind of a long review, but it's all there. If you've been thinking about the HomePod Mini and wondering what it's capable of and what different kinds of scenarios that it works in, that's worth checking out. Also this week, we got what has become kind of an annual press release from Apple about its services and how they're doing. And this year, we found out that on New Year's Day, there were $1.8 billion worth of apps downloaded, which is pretty astounding and yet another record. This is a record that's being broken year after year at this point. There was also record sales during the Christmas to New Year period, which historically has been the biggest time. But Apple also covered a lot of their other services as well. Even books made an appearance alongside things like podcasts and arcade as well. So a lot of interesting tidbits and statistics about the services there. We've got it kind of recapped over on MacStories. Then over the holiday break before this past week, I did a few reviews that I want to mention in case you might have missed it while you were celebrating the holidays. One is a Mac menu bar app called Dado. And Dado is a calendar. It's just a little calendar menu bar app that when you click on it or trigger it with a global keyboard shortcut, it drops down a calendar. You can see, it's optional, but you can see a mini calendar for the current month and that you can navigate around and move from month to month and year to year. And then a list of your events below that. It also supports time zones. You can put time zone information in the menu bar itself or in the drop-down menu that Dado displays when it's triggered. So a lot of different ways to customize this. I've found that it's a really great way, if you're not using an app like Fantastical, to see all of your events and the days of the month in one place very quickly. I like it a lot for that. So that's one worth checking out, especially if you need time zone information. I've found it helpful to be able to quickly check what time it is in various places that way too. Another menu bar app that I covered over the holidays is called Scene Cuts. And Scene Cuts is a real simple menu bar app that lets you access your HomeKit scenes right from the menu bar. So not everything that you can do with scenes is something you would probably want to trigger on your Mac, but maybe you have an appliance that's connected to an outlet, or you have lights on your front porch or something that you want to trigger because you hear a noise while you're working on your Mac. Something like that. Things you want to access quickly and check and trigger one way or the other. It works both as a drop down where you can select the individual scenes that way, or you can take the individual scenes and turn them into their own menu bar items, which is my favorite way to do it because you can select your own icon from the SF symbols set and assign those to the scene and have them sit up right up there along with the other menu bar apps. Finally, I want to cover Fitness Totals. This is a new iPhone app that is focused on widgets. And what it does is it takes all that data that you've got in the health app, things like step counts or running distances or stand hours, that sort of thing. And it gives you, here's where you are today with that statistic, here's where you were last week, and here's where you were last year. You can compare different time periods, in other words. And the app itself has a lot more detail for each one of these statistics. And there's a total of, I think, 15 that you can track. But I really like the widgets because the widgets can be set up to display a whole bunch of different amounts of information depending on the size. But it's a quick way, especially for me with step counting, I've found is a nice approximation for how much exercise I'm getting in the day. So if I look and I see I'm not doing very well this week compared to last week, I know I should get moving. So it's an app worth checking out that's available on iOS. All right, let's move on to Club Mac Stories. This week was our big return with issue number 254. I can't believe we're already up at that kind of number at this point. We had a big issue. We covered an app called Strong that Alex wrote about. Strong is a workout tracker for lifting weights. Really great app that Alex has been using for quite a while and has really found to be both a comprehensive solution as well as a very flexible solution for defining and tracking your weightlifting workouts. We also had 11 giveaways. It's a ton of giveaways, all sorts of health, fitness, and wellness apps and services from a wide variety of developers. We went this time with a whole new group of developers. We've had some repeats in the past, and we wanted to do something new and exciting for members. So we've got a whole different crop of developers involved this time around. And then finally, I wrote a shortcut all about triggering Do Not Disturb both on your iPhone and your Mac simultaneously. It's not as easy to do as you would think. You need to find a way to bridge the iOS automation with the Mac automation, which I did, and I describe how you do that in MacStories Weekly this week. We didn't have an episode of App Stories this week because we're just coming back from break, but we will be back on Monday with episode 200, and we're going to start shaking things up a little bit on App Stories, changing things around. We'll still have the core of what everybody loves about that show, but we're going to experiment with a few new things because this is a year of new beginnings, and I think we're really going to try to take that to heart with App Stories and try some new things. So we've got some ideas for both this episode and future episodes. But the core topic on Monday is going to be the conclusion of our mini-series about revisiting our workflows. We talk a little bit about calendars. We talk about group communication tools like Slack, and Federico has some surprises for everybody, including myself. So don't miss that episode. All right. This episode of MacStories Unwind and all of MacStories this week is brought to you by SaneBox. If you're starting your new year by trying to get your email under control, SaneBox is a great place to start. The app automatically categorizes your email, floating the most important messages right to the top. It does this in a whole bunch of different ways, including messages that are sent in response to ones you've sent or with people you've exchanged messages with in the past. Another strength of SaneBox is that it works with your existing setup. You don't have to do a new service. You don't have to set up a new app, nothing like that. All the filtering and tools that SaneBox offers happen server side, which means you can use it with your existing email services and your existing apps, which is a terrific way to go. The app has a lot of other terrific features like the Sane Black Hole, where you can take an email and say, I don't want to see an email from this person or this organization ever again. Drop it in there and it's just gone. It's a lot easier than unsubscribing. There's also Sane Reminders, where you can BCC a special email address that will then remind you in the future if someone hasn't responded to one of your messages. It's a great way to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. There are tons of other features, many of which are covered in our sponsor post this week on MacStories, so be sure to check that out. I'll have a link in the show notes. Finally, for listeners and readers, SaneBox has a very special deal. Go to sanebox.com/MacStories to get a $25 credit for new users. Take control of your email today with SaneBox. Our thanks to SaneBox for their support of Unwind and MacStories. All right, I've just got one pick for you this week because Federico's not here, but I spent a lot of time digging through best of 2020 lists for movies and TV shows and music and comics and all sorts of different things. And I started digging through and reading and watching a lot of that stuff over the holidays. And one of the things that I watched first was a documentary called The Console Wars, which is on CBS All Access in the US. It's probably available elsewhere as well. But it's a documentary all about the 80s and 90s Nintendo versus Sega battles. So if you're into video game history at all, or you grew up in kind of the early 90s, you'll really want to check this out if you're a video game fan, because there's a lot of nostalgia involved, of course, but there's also a lot of interesting details about how Nintendo was dominating the video game market at the time, and Sega came in and they started to really erode Nintendo's leadership. And it looked like Sega was going to really take over, but then they kind of blew it towards the middle of the 90s. And ultimately, Nintendo came out the victor, I suppose, in that as well. But it's more than just about those battles. It's also about kind of some of the games themselves, the interesting personalities of the people involved around the video game industry. And it goes back and tells a little bit more of the history of Nintendo, which I think a lot of people, video game nerds, will know that Nintendo has been around for just decades and decades and decades, and used to do things like make playing cards and that sort of thing. But it really goes back and explains a little bit about how Nintendo got involved in video games and started taking over that market, and goes into some of the history of Super Mario and all those sorts of things. So check it out. It's a fun documentary. It's about an hour and a half long. I actually signed up for CBS All Access a couple of weeks ago because I wanted to watch that and Stephen King's The Stand series and a couple of other things on CBS All Access. I'm not sure if I'm going to stick with it or not, but so far I've found a lot of good content on CBS All Access. All right, everybody, that's it for this week. As I said, Federico will be back next week. In the meantime, you can find both of us over at MacStories.net, of course. Federico, he's not here, but, shout out to him on the internet. Say hi to him, wish him a happy new year. He's at Fetici on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week.